Hi everybody, so welcome to our first Primary Geography Subject Leaders Network meeting. This is our first one we've done here at Twinkl, and I'm really excited to have you all here today and to hopefully be able to collaborate, find out what you think, see how we can help you, but also to be able to share your ideas with each other and hopefully help each other through that way as well. So to introduce myself first, so I'm Louise Edwards. I'm Twinkl Geography product owner for the primary product, and I'm an experienced teacher across both key stages at primary, and also an experienced geography subject leader as well. So what we're going to be looking at today, we're going to be thinking about getting started in a new year of subject leadership and the things that you can do, using CPD to support teachers and subject leaders, top tips for new geography leaders, teaching about the continents, oceans and seas, thinking about the key terminology and avoiding misconceptions. We're going to be thinking a bit about teaching about places, how we can build depth and avoid misconceptions. Then we've got the lovely Kat Oakes, who's going to be joining us to talk about teaching sustainability through geography. And we're going to finish off with some top tips for fieldwork. So thinking about a new school year, and hopefully you've got settled in now, you're starting to know your classes a bit better, and you're starting to be able to maybe have a bit of headspace to think more about your subject leadership. And so a new school year is a really good chance to really choose how you think you're going to move geography forward in your school and what you're going to do with it as a subject leader. And I'm very aware that, we don't have huge amounts of time for this. So those areas can come from all sorts of different places. You might have areas to focus on that have come from areas that you identified last year. You might have areas that have come from your senior leadership team, or you might need to do some digging around to actually find out what are the areas that most need some focus in geography. So some things that you can do to help with that. So auditing and monitoring. So one thing you can think about is auditing resources. So thinking about having a look in your cupboards, having a look in your classrooms, having a look through your curriculum, and ensuring that your teachers have everything they need to deliver the curriculum. And this can be good to do it either with your teachers, getting them to talk about what they might need, any extra things that if you're lucky enough to have any budget that you might be able to get for them to help them deliver the curriculum. It can also be a good time to kind of look at any subscriptions you've got and think about how you can best use those. Or it can be something that you can do on your own with a tick sheet and have a look through cupboards and things like that as well. So it can be collaborative or not. Attainment and progress is another good one to look at this point, really using last year's attainment, last year's progress, talking to teachers, thinking about the way you record that, and that will help you identify if you have any changes that you need to make in your curriculum. This, I think, is probably one of the most powerful ones, teacher voice. Really thinking about gaining that powerful insight from those in the classroom. Talk to your teachers. They're the ones in there teaching geography every week, each term. They're the ones who are going to be able to give you the biggest insight into what's working well and what's not working so well. So that can be a really good way of digging down and finding that out. And then getting into lessons and looking at books. Now, I know that can be really difficult as a subject leader, particularly for a foundation subject. It can be really difficult to be given that time to get into those lessons, but it is worth asking your senior leadership teams and seeing if you can get into those lessons and really see what's going on, because that will give you the best idea to create that big picture for yourself of what geography looks like in your school. But one thing I'd say to really remember with all of these is they do just give you a snapshot. To really get a good idea of what geography looks like in your school, you do need to kind of use them together and think about those different voices, think about what's in the books, and so on. It's just doing them individually won't necessarily give you that big picture of what needs working on. And then we've got some things on the other side that can help you here. So our auditing and monitoring geography pack has things like it's got an action plan template, it's got a subject knowledge audit, it's got a book look recording form, it's got a resource audit in there. So there's all sorts of things in there that might be able to help you. And if you want a little bit more depth on ways that you can audit and monitor geography, then take a look at our subject leader CPD video for auditing and monitoring geography as well, and that will give you a little bit more information about that than I can cover in this session. So another really great way to find out what's going on with your curriculum and what's going on in your school with geography is pupil voice. It's probably one of the ways that you're going to get the most honest feedback about your curriculum. there's not really anything as honest as the feedback that we get from children, so it can be a really good way to find out what's going on. But I would say, to do this properly, it is vital that you try and get time out of your own classroom. If you're trying to squeeze it in around other things, if you're trying to fit it into your PPA, which is not what it should be used for, then you're going to struggle to get a really good picture of what geography looks like in your school. So really making that case to your senior leadership team that you need time to complete that pupil voice can be really important as well. And I also say that when you're doing that, try and have the children's work with them, either in their classroom where they can see displays, knowledge organisers, books, that kind of thing, or taking those knowledge organisers and books to where you're doing your pupil voice, because it can really help trigger their memories. It can really help them think about what geography is like for them. So that can be another really good way of doing that, and a really good tip. So another way that we can help you is with our Geography Pupil Voice Pack. That's got pupil voice questionnaires that you can give out to children, but it also has sort of interview recording as well, so that if you're doing the pupil voice with them and talking to them, you can find out from that. So that's another really nice resource that you can use to help you with that as well. So now we're going to do our first jump onto the Jamboard. So in a moment, they're going to share the Jamboard in the chat. And if you pop onto that Jamboard, and I want to know, what is the most important piece of feedback that you've had from a pupil? So if you've not used a Jamboard before, if you click on the link, it will take you to Jamboard, and you want page 1 for this. And then if you look at the icons down the side, you'll see that there's a little, there's one that looks like a Post-it note, fourth one down, and that will allow you to add a Post-it note onto the Jamboard, so that we can share that important feedback and hopefully learn from what others have found useful, to help make that useful for our curriculums too. So whilst you're popping on and doing that, I'm going to share what was my most important feedback I had from a pupil. So I found was when I took a group of pupils out and I wanted to ask them about geography, and I wanted to find out what they've been doing. And I think when I asked them quite a general question, asking them what they'd done in geography or when they'd last been taught geography, and I got back the answer that they hadn't been doing geography, that I hadn't done any. And I knew that they'd done a geography lesson that week. I knew that it was the half term when they were being taught geography. And I thought, oh, this is really odd. Why do they not think they're doing geography? And from that, it was really useful feedback to me, because I was able to take away that the subject needed to be more prominent, that it was maybe getting a bit lost in history topics, and that children weren't understanding the difference between when they were learning history and when they were learning geography, and that we maybe needed to implement more retrieval into that as well. And I also knew that children just generally needed a better understanding of what geography was, and to know when they were doing geography in class. So that was my most important feedback. Have we had any interesting ones added on to the Jamboard to share, Helen? So when they say it's boring, yes, that's an interesting one, isn't it? So when children say that it's a boring subject, that's really good feedback, because it does make us think about what we need to do to make the subject more exciting. And I think sometimes that can be down to us as subject leaders, because sometimes if it's being taught by non-specialists, they might not have the knowledge they need to make it more exciting. So yeah, that's really interesting feedback to think about. It's also that it's all about atlases. Yeah, and I think that, I don't know what you took away from that, but what I might have taken away from that is that maybe there's too much of a focus on locational knowledge and not enough of a focus on place and the procedural knowledge, and also think that those sort of skills, building up those fieldwork skills and things like that. So yeah, it is that side of things. It seems we're getting some quite similar ones here, so maybe some similar issues that we've found in different schools. So that would tell me that maybe a real focus on those other parts of the curriculum, on really thinking about that disciplinary knowledge, thinking about what it means to be a geographer, would be a really good one. And that one's a critical one, isn't it? A child that said we always do geography indoors. Wow. So taking away from that, definitely you'd take away that we need to get outside more, but also field work would be a huge one there, wouldn't it? Thinking about, if we're always doing geography indoors, are we teaching them to be geographers? Are they getting to practice that and apply those fieldwork skills? So yeah, that's a huge one. Really, really interesting ones there. Thank you so much, everybody, for adding those to the Jamboard. I'll pop back to the slideshow. Oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. There we go. Right, so action plans is the only other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of subject leadership. So I just had a few little bits of advice when thinking about your action plans, because it's probably that time of year when you're being asked to write your action plans, to set your actions for the year ahead, and to really think about what it is that you're going to try and improve in geography in your school this year. So my biggest tip would be avoid choosing too many actions and really focus on what is important, what is most important right now. I think if we choose too many actions, we can really be looking at that end goal instead of looking at the things that we need to do right there and then, and we're not necessarily focusing on the impact that we want it to make. So, and if we're choosing lots of actions like that, then it can become overwhelming for us, and it can mean that we actually don't achieve as much as we'd like to. So I think really breaking it down to what is your most important focus right now can really be helpful with that. I'd also say work with what can realistically be achieved in the time you have. Schools are very different. Some people get huge amounts of subject leader time out of the classroom and are able to do a lot. Some people have collaborative teams that they work with, and some people are trying to squeeze it all in around being a class teacher and not getting as much support as they might hope for. So really work realistically with what you can do in the time you have and break it down into those small steps that you can realistically achieve. I'd also say, and that setting yourself SMART goals for this, making them specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So if you make it a really specific goal that you want to achieve and you set a time on it, then you're going to make it easier for you to achieve that. And if it's measurable, you're going to know when you've achieved that as well. And that can also be really good for performance management and things like that as well, if you've got those SMART goals to work with. I'd also say, if you're expecting Ofsted, that you don't want that to drive your focus. We don't ever want Ofsted to necessarily drive our focus. But by looking at those deep dive questions, the sort of questions you might be asked, that can really help you to think about your curriculum, to think about what you need to focus on, and to try and drive the subject in the right direction. And to help you with that, we do have a deep dive in geography CPD video, which will talk you through some of the questions that you might be asked, where you might find those answers. So that might be helpful if that's something that either you're approaching or that you just want to do a little bit of finding out about your subject and your curriculum. Okay, moving on to our next topic. How can CPD help you? So you may be aware, or you may not be aware, that we have a lovely range of CPD here for you at Twinkl. Our CPD is short, it's on demand, it has subtitles. So it's very accessible and it fits into your busy lives as teachers. That's the whole point of it. There are lots of CPD resources out there that might need an hour of your time, a day of your time. These don't. They're most of them under 10 minutes. And so you can get a really nice quick overview of a subject that's been well researched and that you know is going to include the main key points that you need, either as a subject leader on a topic or for subject knowledge on a topic. So we have 3 different collections at the moment. We've got our subject leaders collection, which has a variety of topics, which I'll talk through in a minute. Our subject knowledge collection, which at the moment we have locational knowledge, place knowledge, and physical geography. And we're building the human geography collection at the moment. And we also have fieldwork CPD. So I'll talk you through each section a little bit more. So our CPD for subject leaders, we have assessment in geography. So this video talks about key assessment techniques that you can use in foundation subjects. It talks particularly about ones that are suitable for geography, and it also gives you a bit of information on different types of assessment that you could use and why that, and what are some of the upsides and downsides of those. So it'll give you some really good ideas if you're exploring assessment in geography at the moment. Auditing and monitoring I've talked quite a bit about already, so I won't go into that one. Planning a progressive geography curriculum is very much about trying not to fall into that coverage trap of trying to just plan around the curriculum. And it's about thinking about building your curriculum from your intent, from what kind of geographers you want to have in your school, and then thinking about how you can build the progression from that. And it's got key tips on thinking about how you can build a progression and how you can think about what those progressive steps might be for each area of the curriculum. We've got the deep dive in geography, which again, I've already talked you through, so I won't go into detail on that. We've got planning inquiry-based lessons in geography. That's been a big thing that's come up in the recent subject report, is the use of inquiry and how important it is to make sure that units are built around an inquiry question rather than an inquiry question being put in after. And so this will help you explore the use of inquiry a bit more generally, and also in specifically to geography, and thinking about the important things to bear in mind when you are using an inquiry approach in your lessons. We've got progression in map skills, which will really talk you through how you can build that progression in those procedural skills as your children move up through the school. And it also links to our example progression map that we've got on site too, so you can have a look for that too if that's something you're wanting to work on. And then our final one in our subject leader collection is our geography in the earliest foundation stage, which was written alongside our EYFS team here at Twinkl. So it's written by EYFS specialists, and it really talks you through what you might expect to see in geography in the early years foundation stage, what makes good geography in the early years foundation stage, but it also looks at that progression into year one and thinking about how we can build that in. In our subject knowledge collection, we've got 3 different sections at the moment. So in our locational knowledge collection, we've got locating and remembering, which is really all about those locating skills and thinking about how we can lock in that knowledge, how we can help children remember. So there's a lot about retrieval in that one as well. Locational knowledge is the key subject knowledge for that topic. Position, invisible lines on the earth. That one goes into latitude and longitude, into the tropics, the Arctic and Antarctic Circle, and all of those important positional lines. And that one gives you kind of the overview of the subject knowledge for that. And then we've got the significance of positional lines, which goes much more into the significance of those things in terms of day length, climate, and things like that. So that's one slightly more in depth in that section. And then we've got the significance of time zones, which will give you the key knowledge on time zones and also the significance of those across the world. We've also got our place knowledge collection, which has teaching about places, which will give you some general information about how to teach about places, how we can avoid misconceptions and stereotypes, what kind of things you might want to cover. And then we've also got 3 videos linking to the Key Stage 2 curriculum about Europe, North America and South America, which will give you some key ideas about places you could teach about for different areas of the Key Stage 2 curriculum. And then finally, we've got our physical geography collection in our subject knowledge. And in there, we've got biomes and vegetation belts, climate zones, earthquakes, mountains, rivers, volcanoes, and the water cycle. And those will give you the key knowledge that you would need to teach those topics. And then finally, our fieldwork CPED, which is an incredibly popular part of our collection. With our most popular video, What is Fieldwork and Why is it Important, is a great one to use if you've got staff that are not feeling very confident with fieldwork and they just really need to find out more about what it is and why it's so important that we do it. So if you're at those early stages of trying to build more fieldwork in, that one can be a really good one to use in a staff meeting. And being under 10 minutes, these are really good to use in staff meetings to really just give a quick overview and then be able to discuss around it and build things on from there. We've got the developing a sense of place, which is really about that, developing that idea of the place around them and the kind of techniques that you can use to do that. We've then got our planning fieldwork inquiry in EYFS and Key Stage 1, in lower Key Stage 2 and upper Key Stage 2. And those are really good for giving support in those particular year groups to help people know how to plan a fieldwork inquiry, to help them know the different steps of a fieldwork inquiry and to give some ideas. But they're also really good that if you watch the set of them, it gives you a really good idea of the progression as children move up the school for those fieldwork skills as well. We've got virtual fieldwork, which is for those times when you either can't get out in the field for various reasons, or you're learning about a place further away and you need to use those techniques for fieldwork in a more virtual way. And we've got data collection methods, which talks you through a range of different ways that you can collect data in fieldwork. And our newest videos for fieldwork are our fieldwork tips videos, which will give you tips for a particular topic. So at the moment, we've got rainforest topic and seaside topic. So if you're doing either of those topics this year, those can be a really good one to look at to get some really good ideas for how you could include fieldwork in those topics. So one thing I wanted to add to this is just to say, I've talked a lot about how CPD can help you and how it can help in your school, but we really want to know how we can help you. So please do let us know of any other topics that you would find useful. And you can do that through the feedback survey that you're going to do at the end. And if you're also, it doesn't have to be geography, you can also let us know this wider CPD team would be really grateful to know of any other CPD that you would find particularly useful as well. So moving on, top tips for new geography leads. Now, I was hoping we'd have a geography lead who was new last year joining us, but unfortunately they weren't able to make it. So instead of that, we've gathered together from lots of different geography leads their top tips for what they think you should do as a new geography lead. So if we've got any new geography leads joining us today, hopefully this will give you some things to think about. So we've talked about this a little bit already, but the first one is don't just jump in. Consider your actions carefully and think about what will make the biggest impact on the learning. And I think that's a really important one. And I've talked about that a bit already, haven't I? And said about how I think that's so important to think about that impact, and you know, not just do things because you think they need to be done. Think about what actually is going to make an impact on the learning. Ask for time to achieve bigger tasks. We've talked about that a bit already as well, haven't we? If the curriculum needs reworking, you're not going to fit that around teaching. I think that's a really good tip, is really think about the size of the tasks you've got to do and if you can fit them in, because you're not going to be able to do them in a quality way if you haven't got time for them. Join and follow the subject associations. They can be brilliant for getting more information about things, for finding out about things, for keeping up to date with things. So the Geographical Association and the Royal Geographical Society can be really good sources of information. So absolutely, I'd agree with that one. Ensure there's field work in every year group and that this has a geography focus. That's been a big thing coming through in the subject reports that's been released recently as well, is that not only making sure you've got field work, but it's that geography focus. They've said that too often people are going out on school trips and they might have a lovely day out, but that trip maybe hasn't got much of a geography focus going on. And so that's something that people might be working on as well. So that's worth bearing in mind. Get a good understanding of geography in your school. When is it taught, how and when, and how is progression shown? So we've already talked about building that big picture of what's going on in your school and understanding that before you set your actions. So I think that's a great tip. This one I love. Don't try to do too much too quickly. Focus on what most needs improvement and go in small steps. Yeah, avoid that overwhelm by just trying to break it down and think about that. And this is a nice one as well. If you have the option, talk to the previous leader to gain insight and find out what their planned next steps were. If they're still around, you'll be able to do that. If not, you might have been able to do that before they left. But yeah, absolutely. Finding out everything that they've gained in their year being that subject leader or their time being that subject leader could be really valuable, I think. So I'm going to hand over to you guys again so that you can collaborate on this one. So I'd like to know, what are your biggest tips for new geography leads? Think back to when you were a new geography lead and see what helped you the most. And if you can add that to the Jamboard, that would be great. So this time we're going to page 2 on the Jamboard. I'm sure they'll share the link for you again to make sure you've got it if you've lost it. And whilst you guys are getting onto the Jamboard, I will share my biggest top tip. So mine would definitely be in agreement with focusing on the impact of your actions and only going for actions that will have an impact. I think sometimes it can be all too tempting to do things that look good, but maybe don't have the biggest impact on the children's learning. So, for instance, you might decide that you're going to do a really impressive geography display that's going to look fantastic in the corridor, and that's going to raise the prominence of geography. And whilst that might be a lovely thing to do and great to do if you've got time, is it going to have the biggest impact on the learning, or are there other ways that you can raise the prominence of geography that won't take as much of your time and that can have more of an impact on the children's curriculum and their learning? So I think that would be my biggest tip. So let's have a look and see if we've got any added to the Jamboard that we can share. So let's head to the next page. So make new changes and make them bite-sized and manageable for teachers to take on board. The timetable is so packed, so do things in stages and be realistic. I love that one. I think that's so true. And yeah, the packed timetable, I think that's a really good point to raise as well, is that if you go in all guns blazing and you try and say, right, we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this, you're not just you that's going to get overwhelmed, but those teachers in your school as well. If you ask them to do too much at once, then you're either going to get pushback, or you're going to ask for things to happen and they're not going to happen, and it might not be as successful as you'd hoped. Whereas if you introduce those changes in a bite-sized, manageable way, like this person's suggesting, then yeah, I think you're absolutely going to be more successful. And this is an interesting one as well. Keep note of everything that is good and that you have achieved and that's created a real impact rather than just what you want to do next. That's great, because I focused so much today talking about thinking about what's going to make an impact, thinking about what you need to do, thinking about what you need to do next, how you need to improve geography. But yeah, it's so important that we keep that record of what we've done well and what we've achieved and how geography's grown, not only for ourselves and our own self-esteem and our own well-being, for our performance management, to be able to share with SLT, but also if you've got Ofsted coming up and you've got that deep dive, you want to be able to share all the amazing things that you've achieved and how far you've come as well. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic tip to share. Thank you so much for adding those ones, guys. They're great. All right, moving on then. Now, these ones I have included in our presentation today because they are the biggest questions that I see getting asked on social media and in person when I'm talking to people. These questions are always getting asked. So the first one is what to call the continents. And so I'm sharing here what the best practice is. The difficult thing with this is there isn't really an answer. There's no real answer to what should we call the continents. It's not in the curriculum. There's nobody out there who's saying you must use this term. But the best practice is for children to know that all three can be used. So you never know when they're going to change school, when they're going to come across the use of a different one at secondary school, when they're going to use a different book or a different atlas or a TV show that is going to share a different one to the one we've been teaching. So it is really important that we don't just focus on one and that we do introduce them to all three of those terms. Okay. Another thing to bear in mind with that is that speaking to our secondary colleagues, that secondary often uses Oceania, but Australasia can be used too. But Australia is usually not accepted at secondary school. So if we're just using that through primary and then they go to secondary, they're maybe going to find themselves in a very confusing place. So making sure they've got that overview of knowing all three can be really important. School atlases can be a really good guide for the one to focus on as well, because it's all very well saying focus on all three, but if you're doing a labelling activity or something like that, you're going to need to choose one. You're not necessarily going to want to get them to write all three every time, particularly when they're really quite young. And as I've said, there isn't a simple answer to this. To help you, what we are trying to now do is with our different resources that are to do with continents, every time we make a new resource to do with continents, we are making sure that we make it with all three included. So you'll either find something like this continents labelling pack, which has got where you'll go into a zip file and find that you've got all three included and you can choose the one that you want to download, or you'll find it in the alts. So if you go into the alts underneath the resources on our Twinkl website, you will find that in the alt there will be a Australasia alt and an Australia alt that you can use. And to help with that, we've also got things like our consonants and oceans jigsaw that can help you with that as well. And again, you'll find that in all three ways. So just to finish off with that, what does the GA say? So what does the Geographical Association say about that? So this was a quote that has been shared on social media and in other subject leader network meetings, but I got in contact with the GA and asked them, well, one, were we okay to share it? And two, were they happy? Which would be the bits they'd emphasise? And so this was the quote they said: this should be an easy one, right? But alas, sometimes there can be ambiguity in even the simplest of geographical concepts. When does a hill become a mountain? What are Earth's major biomes? And what do we call the continent down under? Geography isn't a yes or no subject, is it? So that comes up a lot. The physical and political configuration of the world, mixed with historical context and the different approaches of many nations, makes this a challenge. Some countries recognise just 5 continents, while some geologists speak of a largely submerged 8th continent called Zealander. So that's the context around it. But what the GA said to me was that these down here are the really important points, that there is a real range of viewpoints on this. World Atlas uses Australia and Oceania, while Collins Atlases use Oceania. The best advice they say that they can give is to use the atlases that you have in school to guide you, but also ensure that pupils are aware that they may come across all three in common use. Australasia, Australia, and Oceania are commonly used, and different atlases use different terms. In-house and for Geographical Association publications, they use Oceania because that encompasses Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Polynesia, and other Pacific Island groups. And that is what we use as standard at Twinkl as well. We've started using Oceania. So in general, in the newer resources, you will see that as the standard, and then you'll see the other two available as alts. The other big question that always gets asked, seas around the UK. Is it a misconception to be labelling the Atlantic Ocean? Now, this is a really interesting one because it's kind of a yes and a no. Because the answer is no, it's not a misconception to be labelling the Atlantic Ocean on a labelling activity of the UK, or to be including it within the seas, an activity and in your discussions. But if that's done in isolation, then yes, it could lead to a misconception. So it's really important that we teach the context around labelling activities and the context around teaching the seas of the UK. Because the curriculum doesn't specify 5 oceans. It does specify 5 oceans, but it just specifies surrounding seas. It doesn't specify the names of them or which ones we should cover. So to help with this, we've got some lovely fact files. We've got a nice fact file on the different oceans that can help you with this. But we've also got this brand new one, which explains a little bit more about what are oceans and what are seas, and puts that a little bit in the context of being around the United Kingdom. It is aimed at Key Stage 1, so it doesn't go into a huge amount of detail, but it's a really nice way of having a little reading activity that can give them a little bit more context around that. So thinking about definitions. So definition of an ocean, one of the definitions is that one of the 5 large areas that the ocean is divided into. Definition of a sea, the areas of salt water that are part of oceans and are enclosed or partly enclosed by land. Then we've got lakes, which is seas that are also landlocked, can also be categorised as lakes. So that's a really important one to bear in mind, that some of the seas are actually categorised as lakes too. And so I want us to think about what are the best ways that we could teach this in context at Key Stage 1. What's important for us to include? So thinking about that, what do the GA and the RGS say? So I asked both of them this time, and these were the main points that they made. So they said the curriculum only specifies teaching the 5 oceans and isn't specific on the other bodies of water. So that means it is down to our choice. We can look at those maps and decide which ones we feel we should include. But generally, the ones that are on the labelling activities that we use at Twinkl are the ones that most schools will tend to use. But knowledge of the oceans is that building block, that the understanding that the location of the UK is built upon. So it's really important that we get that knowledge of the oceans to build that upon. If we're trying to teach about the seas before we've got knowledge of the oceans, that's not necessarily going to work. So think about, when looking at the location of the UK, that the Atlantic Ocean should be included. So first of all, we're thinking about the Atlantic Ocean and its location around the UK, and then that should feed into thinking about where the seas are. So thinking about including and labelling the Atlantic Ocean on resources, because it reinforces that locational knowledge and helps build an understanding of the scale of oceans. So if we're labelling on that one and saying there aren't any specified seas on this side, but there are around the other sides, then we're really helping to build that scale and build that understanding of the difference between what seas are, what oceans are, and how they fit together. And so if trying to teach that without that context is not going to be very successful. So that's where I wanted to add that. So we're going to use our breakout room now. So we're going to pop into our breakout rooms. We're only going to use it for a short time. So you're going to have 3 minutes. And remember, in the breakout rooms, it won't be recorded. So feel free to have your discussions. And then if you do come up with any ideas from that, feel free to add those to the Jamboard on page 3 as well, so that you can find out a little bit more so we can find out a little bit more about what you spoke about in your breakout rooms. So what we want to try and answer the question in our breakout rooms is, what ways have you found to teach the UK seas in context? Are there any really good activities you've used in class? Are there any other things that you've done? So Helen is now going to launch the breakout rooms. You should get a little pop-up that will ask you to join the breakout room. So once you get that, if you click that, it will take you to the breakout room and you can start to have a little discussion with the other people in your room.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Kat. I'm the sustainability product owner here at Twinkl, and I look after the creation of a product line called Eco Adventures, which is primarily a sustainability scheme of work. And thanks to Louise, it's just great to be able to speak in this session, just to explain and sort of introduce Eco Adventures, and also, you know, sort of say that geography and sustainability are interdependently linked, really. You know, when we're teaching about geography and covering topics such as rivers or oceans, we could perhaps hint that there's, you know, those climate change issues related to those. And in geography terms, sustainability really means that it's a process, resource, or state that can be maintained at a certain level for as long as is needed. So in terms of sort of sustainability, if we look at sort of the environmental impacts and solutions, we as humans need 5 essential resources, which is for survival. So that's our food, our water, our clothing, our sleep, and our shelter. And all of those involve the use of natural and human-made resources with differing impacts or solutions. So sustainability can obviously mean different things in these economic, environmental, and social contexts. And that is also linked to the 3 pillars of sustainability. So thinking about geography lessons and how they could be perhaps enhanced with sustainability themes and knowledge, it could be introducing a question, perhaps when you're teaching that rivers lesson, perhaps you're looking at how a river is flowing, and you could say, what are beavers doing to increase the habitat and the biodiversity of this area? Perhaps when you're teaching about oceans, you could mention about various different ocean habitats, such as seagrass meadows, coral reefs, and the importance of them being big carbon stores, and sort of delving into that carbon change and information knowledge on climate change, really. In terms of resources, we know that Earth's resources are finite, but we need to give that information to children of what finite means. So meaning a particular resource will run out. And our use of these finite resources are unsustainable. So we're basically using them much faster than they're created, but it's also in the way that we're using them, which is causing irreversible damage to our planet. So it's explaining that the use of these fossil fuels are releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and gradually warming up Earth in its greenhouse effects. So looking at these themes, it's just thinking about your geography lessons and thinking how you can introduce those sustainability key questions whilst you're talking through or teaching a specific topic in mind. Next slide, please, Louise. Thank you. Brilliant, thank you. So I'm in charge of this Eco Adventures sustainability product. So it's our sustainability scheme of work basically at Twinkl. And it's really new, actually. We released it only in January of this year. And we've designed it so it can be seamlessly taught alongside the national curriculum, which, you know, is super packed, and there's lots to fit in, which we are aware of, which is why we've sort of built it with an approach that teachers can sort of pick up a lesson and go with it, or perhaps they could pick up a topic and teach that within a half term, whatever fits your school and your setting and the way you teach. So we have everything you need to teach children about climate change, sustainability, and also the importance of taking care of our planet and giving children the belief that they have actual something to do about this problem that we face without worrying them. So we have 6 key topic areas. And in January is when we released our first topic, which is all about Earth's natural and human enhanced climate and cycles. Recently, actually in September just gone, we've just released our water and life below water unit. And there's some fantastic lessons in there, which include exploring water's importance for people and wildlife, including their habitats and their links to climate change and carbon storage, but also looking at the significance or the human element of clean water for health, hygiene, and covering those socio-economic factors. And then soon to be released is our waste unit. I think this will be a really popular one, and some of these sort of aspects you'll be able to implement in your school site. So looking at various different types of waste, including food waste, fast fashion, landfill problems, and plastic pollution. So those are going to be real key topics which children are quite familiar with and aware of in terms of plastic especially. And then we have subsequent units which will be coming out in 2024. So our life on Earth and biodiversity, our energy, which will be super popular, and also the global citizenship module. So you could consider, again, you know, teaching some of these sustainability lessons alongside the geography topics. Have a look, have a browse, see what we've got, and like I said, those lessons can be picked up and taught, or you can teach them as a scheme, whichever suits you and whichever is best for your teaching methods in your school setting. Next slide, please, Louise. Thanks. So with Eco Adventures and the way it's been crafted, we've had eco-anxiety to think about, because teaching sustainability and climate change can be very stressful to learn about, especially for children who are curious, but also they get a little bit worried. And this is what eco-anxiety is. So to tackle that, we've carefully crafted a scheme that helps to limit this eco-anxiety and the fear of helplessness. So we have a cast of memorable characters. We've got our characters ranging from EYFS, which is Peg the Platypus on the far left, really cute, and then ranging all the way through to Year 6, where we've got our snow leopard. And they are present within our lesson presentations. They pose questions, discussion points, and generally try to tackle sustainability with a collective group effort, so that children don't feel it coming all on them as if they can't do anything. They're exposed, children, if we think about it, to a huge amount of information on the news, social media, you know, even when perhaps they go to a fast food chain and they're ordering a fast meal, it might be packaged in plastic, or perhaps they've introduced paper straws, which is great. So children are exposed to that information and will have questions. So just some other handy tips, I guess, to tackle eco-anxiety and encourage that collaborative conversation would be to encourage those class discussions with your class and your pupils. Have those questions ready and answers to answer any misconceptions that they may have. Like I said, they're exposed to environmental solutions, so perhaps discussing the positives and negatives of these environmental solutions, such as electric cars or renewable energy sources. And then we've got our Eco Adventures characters, which I mentioned, are there to pose questions. And also within our lesson PowerPoints, we have a section called Spread the Joy, which is right at the end of our lesson PowerPoints. And when a class or a child has learnt about a particular topic in the lesson, this comes at the end, and it might be spreading a joyous part or content related information to that lesson. So for example, if they were doing a lesson on coral reefs, which is in our Year 4 water topic, there is a Spread the Joy section which discusses all about the regeneration and replantation of coral reefs on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. So it's celebrating and giving solutions to those sort of negative aspects. Next slide, please, Louise. Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to mention here the Department for Education Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy. So we are working behind the scenes at Twinkl to support you with this developing strategy, which the government has released. And the government has said several things about implementing sustainability, all the way from EYFS building through to secondary school. So they've said that building on a foundation of fundamental numeracy, literacy and academic knowledge, the children will learn about the nature, the causes and impacts of climate change, but also that importance of sustainability. And I think possibly what's missing there is, yes, it's great to learn about the importance of sustainability, but also not to put the pressure on the children that it's all their responsibilities to solve this, because it's a collective global effort that we've all got to do together. So in EYFS, the framework ensures that children develop an understanding of the world and the natural environment around them. So they do this with exploration, play activities, perhaps understanding different materials, exploring plastic, for example. But as they progress through primary and secondary school, they build on this knowledge, and this is what Eco Adventurers plans to do. We have that progressional knowledge all the way through from EYFS all the way up through to Key Stage 1 and then Key Stage 2. So they're gaining those key terms, those key content concepts, and having a broad overview of what sustainability means. And the DV also mentioned that this should be sort of covered within maybe when you're teaching science, geography, and citizenship, or PSHE as it's sometimes called. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a statement from the DfE. They've actually said that it's to provide the opportunity for all staff, so that's teaching and leadership, to build their understanding of climate change and sustainability by receiving carbon literacy training. So this is going to be introduced where a sustainability lead will need to be in place in every school setting by 2025. So we think that the sustainability lead could be an existing geography or science leader, as this could sort of fit within their role. So what we're doing to help is we're actually developing a range of CPD and guidance documents around the strategy, built around how to help you achieve the 5 action points that is written in there. And also, if you would like any further information about this, I encourage you please to leave your email address, because we will be releasing something really exciting on site towards the end of the year to help you deal with some of these action areas. And I think it's just useful to say that, you know, using education and the position that we're all in, we can empower these young people to have a better understanding about climate change and its connection to nature, and, you know, possibly even inspire them to have future green skilled careers in their future, and have that better understanding from an early age, which builds up throughout their school life. I think, is that my last slide, Louise?
I think so.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that it'd be really useful, actually, if there's any schools or any teachers or individuals who are already practicing sustainable activities or practices within their school setting. We'd love to hear from you, because we want to celebrate what you're already doing and share that best practice, you know, across to other schools as well. So yeah, thank you very much. And if there's any questions, you can pop that on the feedback form at the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Kat. That's been really, really interesting, and it's really great to see how that curriculum's developed and those lovely characters that you've got to help present the eco-anxiety. So we really appreciate you sharing that with us. Hey, so moving on to our last couple of things today. So we're just going to have a little talk about teaching about places. So one really difficult thing about humanities teaching is that we're often in the difficult position of teaching things that we haven't directly experienced. We can't have travelled everywhere or visited everywhere that we have to teach about. And so as teachers and subject leaders, how can we be sure that we're portraying an accurate view of places across the world when we may not have visited them? We all also have our own bias, and as much as we try not to, we are going to have our own bias that's provided by our experiences, by our upbringing, by the things we've been exposed to. And identifying that bias can really help us to make sure that we don't bring too much of it through in our teaching. And it's worth remembering that the children we teach will have their own bias too. So think about how we can challenge that bias and address those misconceptions through our teaching is really important. So one of the ways we can do that is to look from a range of perspectives. And this is something that has really been mentioned in the recently released subject report, really thinking about the places that you study in your curriculum, and thinking, rather than having a huge amount of places, thinking about about breaking that down and thinking about if we can revisit places, looking from what they call it in the subject report is looking from different lenses, and break that down so that we're seeing different places in different ways. So think about, if we often start planning a topic, you might search for images of a place to use within your lesson. And if you search online for images of a place, the overwhelming view you're going to see is that of the tourist. You're going to see some perfectly curated images that are shiny and beautiful, and maybe don't reveal some of those geographical issues that we might want to be bringing up in our teaching. So by drawing our own and children's attention to these other perspectives, we can create a broader sense of places. So what sort of perspectives could we consider? So we might consider the local community perspective, thinking about the people that live there. What are their stories? And thinking about, are there any individuals that you can focus on? We might consider the perspective in the news, thinking about what are the recent stories about this place. It's very important, if you do that, that you look at it in advance. We need to be aware of news bias, and we also need to be aware of inappropriate news and sharing that with the children. There are lots of places around the world with issues that we wouldn't want to be sharing with children of primary age. So it is important that we bear that in mind when we look at the in the news perspective. Animals and biodiversity, much to do with what Kat was just talking about, thinking about what's the habitat like? How is that habitat changing? What sort of trends are there in the different species? And that links quite nicely with the next one as well, thinking about things from a climate perspective. So how does the climate affect how people live there, but also what are the impacts of climate change on the area? And, how does that affect the way that we see that place and how things might change in that place in the future? And by looking from those different perspectives, we can give a much wider view of what places are like. So some good sources of information you can use to help you with these. So for local communities, a really good place you can go is the WWF communities section. They've got lots of information on individual communities there where you can dig down and find out about those. In the news, you can have a look at Twinkl Newsroom. They've got lots of articles around places and different things that have happened in places. Children's news programs are another good one to use for that, and Geography in the News is very good as well for that. For the animal and biodiversity lens, you can look at the WWF Living Planet Index. There's also the IUCN Red List. Earth's Endangered Creatures is another really good one that breaks that down. And we've also got lots of resources on the Twinkl website about endangered creatures. If you can't find what you're looking for, don't forget about our request process. Get in touch with Twinkl Cares and ask them for what you're looking for, and hopefully it's something that we might be able to make for you. And then for the climate one, climate is a difficult one, and like we say, we might find some of it through that through the eco adventurers topics as well. But there's a carbon brief extreme weather map, which although it's not necessarily the sort of map that would be you'd want to share with children because it's quite detailed and it's got quite a lot of information on it, it might only be suitable for older children. But that map does give you a really good idea of the kind of extreme weather that is happening in those places you are studying, so that can be linked back to climate change. The IPCC gives a really good overview of climate science. It's, again, not the sort of website that you could use with children, but if you're wanting to sort of upskill your own subject knowledge, it's really good for that. And the European Commission Consequences of Climate Change is really good if you're looking at places around Europe, because it really it gives some information on the consequences of climate change of different places within Europe. So those are some really good sources that you can use to help you with looking from a range of perspectives. So thinking about what the Ofsted subject report says about this, I mentioned this earlier, but I've got a few quotes to help you understand what they're saying. So knowledge about place is more variable. Some schools include a large number of places across their curriculum, but these are not returned to in different contexts, and pupils only know about them in the context of one single story. This is especially true of places in Africa, which are too often only taught about through a lens of economic development. Sometimes the resources that teachers have selected present an outdated and inaccurate view of the places being studied. At other times, pupils' knowledge of places is little more than a list of disconnected facts. This often happens when pupils are expected to find out information for themselves with little explicit teaching on how to organise this information into a coherent geographical understanding of the place. So the main takeaways, I think, from that are really thinking about where you can plan in places in your curriculum to make sure that you're returning to them in these different contexts, in these different lenses. Are you going to be able to look at one place for rivers and then go back to that place when you are looking at distribution of natural resources and link those things together, and then go back to that when you're looking at climate and think about how the climate affects that place? So and start linking together those different things so that you're getting a much bigger picture of this place throughout your curriculum. Also, I think another big takeaway from that is thinking about research activities and making sure that if we do give children a research activity, that they've got the basis of the understanding of that place behind them, rather than using it as a way for them to gain that information, because it might be that they don't have enough background context of that place to be able to do that without it creating misconceptions. So another big thing to think about is using images. So again, we talked about if you do that search, you don't necessarily see the ideal images to use in your geography lessons. You see those nice, shiny, curated images of a place. And it's important to provide context around the images used, because images can be a cause of misconceptions if they aren't used within that context. And researching around an area a bit, looking at those different perspectives, can give you a really good idea of what to look for in your photographs. And you might think, but I see a lot of those shiny images in some of the Twinkl photo packs, and that is true. It's something we're gradually updating our place photo packs to make sure that we can include a wider range of images and the context of places. So if you do see one you'd like updating sooner, please get in touch with Twinkl Cares so that we can get that one updated for you. So just a few examples of this. So we've got a nice example of Taj Mahal here, where you can see the lovely shiny image that you might find if you did an internet search here, presenting this lovely clean place with tourists, everything looking beautiful and symmetrical. And then if we look at the image to the left, we can see the issues of pollution within the river just behind. So it's really, really important that we're providing that context, that maybe that isn't telling the full story of that place. Similar here, we've got one of London, a particular bridge, and we can see again that lovely tourist view that you might take from your camera when you're visiting, but we can also see that what might be found around and under that bridge is not always telling quite the same story about the way the place is. A couple more examples of that. We've got an example of Egypt here. You can see that view of the pyramids, which can often give that misconception that they're out in the middle of nowhere. But if we then use this photo alongside that, we can see that we can view the pyramids from a fast food restaurant. And you can also get those lovely images where you can see the city in the background as well. So those give that important context. And then we've got some pictures of Haysborough in Norfolk here as well, which gives you that lovely tourist view of the lighthouse, the idyllic place to visit. And whilst it is a wonderful place to visit, we wouldn't want to ignore that context of the difficulties with the crumbling cliffs and the impact that that's having on people in that community. So you can see there, just by putting those juxtapositions of those two different photos, you can really give that deeper thinking of the place, and it can start some really interesting discussions around what places are really like. So moving on from that, our last thing today to talk about is top tips for fieldwork. So fieldwork is an area many schools are working on, but it continues to be highlighted as an area that many schools and teachers find difficult. And I'm sure you've seen this in your school. It's so difficult sometimes to be able to find the time to get out. It's difficult to be able to find sometimes the funds to be able to go to those places that are further away. But it is such an important part of the curriculum. So why is it important? Well, as well as being a key part of the curriculum, it's the real life learning that allows children to explore places, link together the concepts, and gain and practice geographical skills. Fieldwork is a key part of that thinking like a geographer and being able to behave like a geographer. So again, the Ofsted subject report, what does it say about this? So it says another area that's underdeveloped in many schools is the approach to fieldwork, and that this is now extending beyond the challenges that are presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. And that in primary schools, fieldwork is often conflated with field trips. Pupils may go out of school on a visit, but they're rarely learning how to carry out geographical work when they do so. And I know I've seen this myself. I've seen myself where there's a lovely trip planned, and it might be a lovely trip to the seaside or something like that, but maybe opportunities are missed to be able to include fieldwork within that trip. So they've also said, teach pupils about fieldwork. Pupils should know how to collect, present and analyse data, and how to reach and evaluate conclusions based on this data. Some of this should include first-hand experience of collecting data, and pupils should get better at carrying out fieldwork over time. So top tips for that. One, I would say, is access CPD. If it's something your staff are struggling with, building staff confidence is key, and ensuring the fieldwork planned into your curriculum actually takes place. Okay, and using a range of providers is great for that. We provide this lovely fieldwork CPD that you can do each one of these videos in under 10 minutes, but you may want some more in-depth fieldwork, and there are lots of wonderful ones to be found out there as well. So using a range of providers and getting a range of experiences can be really important too. So all of our fieldwork CPD is on demand, under 10 minutes long, and makes it really easy to direct staff to if they need a quick boost to really help them with their knowledge of fieldwork. So another really good tip is to use your school grounds and local area to embed skills. The cost of trips and coaches can be a big barrier, but it is possible to carry out a wide range of fieldwork by just relying on the areas around you. And also using your local area ensures regular practice of the skills, and that the sessions are focused rather than skills being lost in being part of a trip. And to help with that, we do have a risk assessment template. It's not ready to go. You do need to be able to look at it in the context of your school, your trip, but it might help you think a little bit about the kind of things that might come up. And I've just popped another one of our videos there as well, developing a sense of place, that gives you a bit more information about how you can develop that sense of your local area. So again, what does the subject report say? So in schools where fieldwork was done well, it was built into the curriculum. Pupils were taught in class how fieldwork was done and were then given regular opportunities to carry out elements of it. This did not always involve going out of school. Pupils sometimes collected data from within their classroom or their school grounds. On other occasions, pupils were given the fieldwork data because the curriculum was focusing on another element of the fieldwork process rather than data gathering. So don't be afraid to think that every time you have to carry out a full inquiry, you can absolutely embed it into your curriculum and think about particular skills. So if you're working on the skills of analysing data and drawing conclusions from it, then providing that data to the children might be a really good way of doing that, so that it's not taking up too much of your packed curriculum, and so that you're practicing those skills at other times than when you're just carrying out a full fieldwork inquiry. So that can be a really good practice. Think about progression. So do the skills deepen over time? And are the children getting better at fieldwork as they move up the school? If they don't, then it might be something that you really need to think about building into your curriculum more, and how you can build that progression in. And use fieldwork inquiries. As we said, it doesn't always have to be a full inquiry, but it is good that if each year at least they get to carry out a full fieldwork inquiry and see it from beginning, thinking about the questioning, through to collecting the data, analysing that data, and then thinking about concluding and drawing solutions and conclusions from that data as well. And as I've shown you here, those planning a fieldwork inquiry videos will provide a great basis for you to really think about that progression and to share with staff that might be trying to plan those in their own year groups. So a little bit more about what the subject report says. In some schools, leaders have not considered what to teach in terms of geographical skills, in particular skills relating to fieldwork. Leaders in some schools confuse fieldwork with field trips or visits. Fieldwork tended to be seen as an activity to be done rather than as an opportunity to teach a body of procedural knowledge or to teach pupils how geographers approach their work. Leaders rarely gave much thought to which geographical skills needed to be taught, when to teach them, or how pupils would practice them to the point of fluency. So again, this is really talking about making sure that we are planning in when that field work is going to happen, and making sure that those skills are deepening and building over time. And that is something that takes time, but that is well worth building into your curriculum. And then another top tip I would have is practice skills through virtual fieldwork. So it can't replace getting out in the field. That's so important to stress. But carrying out virtual fieldwork can allow children to develop and apply skills more regularly, helping them to progress. So if you're doing a topic about somewhere further away in the world, you might not have the opportunity to carry out local fieldwork as part of that, but you can still embed those skills and apply those skills more regularly by carrying out some virtual fieldwork. So again, we've got our video on virtual fieldwork that you can watch if you'd like a little bit more information on that. So I'm going to leave you today with the Jamboard. So please do pop on there either during the questions or after the session, and leave any ideas for what are your top tips for meaningful fieldwork.